Hi, it's Iona here, and today I have the most amazing privilege of introducing a good friend of mine, John Caswell. He is the CEO of Group Partners. So welcome, John. How are you today? Well, it's early morning in London, 9 o'clock. Yep.
Yes, it is. And it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for asking me to speak. I'm very much looking forward to it. And yes, it's a beautiful day in London and raring to find out who I am.
So actually, you lead me straight into the first question, which is, if someone came up to you today, as I am right now, and said, who exactly is John Caswell? How would you describe yourself?
Yes, it's quite a challenging question, really. I think the world we live in makes us need to be lots of different people for different reasons at different times. So it's always a contextual question, that one. I think I would probably answer it as someone on a permanent journey of discovery of myself. And I think that's partly because of the world we now live in, and partly because of my previous answer, which is our need to be wearing many hats at different times. I think when I was growing up, it was, oh, you need to be a fill in the blanks. You know, you needed to be an architect or a builder or an estate agent or a salesman or whatever it was, an engineer. And of course, now I think we can be all of those things quite easily. And of course, in my world, I have to be. It's interesting, really, because I think I got it from my father, who, when I was tiny, I always remember him sitting at this enormous draftsman's table, drawing these most incredible draftsman's technical drawings, basically, and he was a master at it. And I was just in awe, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this was the most amazing thing, that he had this huge drawing board and these amazingly tiny little ink pens and rulers and strange implementation. And he was an engineer of machinery and rockets and, you know, airplanes. And he just drew these things on the board, and they would come to life for me. He was this incredible inspiration. He would fix things, he would draw things, he could paint, he made things out of wood. He had a shed, which was more of a sort of barn, really. It was this full of tools and equipment and lathes and machinery, and it always smelled amazing of carved wood and ink. And it must have left an incredible impression on me, because these engines just flew right there on the page. And the other thing was this incredible handwriting that he had, because he was an engineer. And of course, in those days, they taught engineers to write very clearly and very precisely. And I obviously, like all of us, you know, you don't realize what a lesson that was at the time. And of course, it stayed with me in my work today, really. And I would never be as brilliant as I remember him to be. And of course, he was a huge inspiration. Made me quite emotional, actually, talking about him like that.
So your link with your father is obviously very, very strong, and what you do at Group Partners is all revolving around visual creativity. So it sounds like that came from your experience from watching your father.
Do you know, I think what you say is quite correct, although that isn't how I think about it. I think I use visuals to trick people into having better conversations, because it's almost like a stealthy way of getting them to pay attention. I think kind of the problems with the world is that bandwidth is so constrained, no one has time to think. So if I'm with a group of senior executives helping them with a strategy, I'm still having probably the same conversation that they would have had, perhaps with a lot more objective challenge and a lot more critical challenge, to get them to actually stop and think about the assumptions that they've just made in answering a very simple question. And I could have that conversation intellectually with them, but if I could draw it in front of them on a wall, what I was trying to say, or what I think they meant, rather than what they said, the reaction is quite incredible, really. It's like, oh my God, yes, that's what I meant to say.
Mm.
And I'd say, well, it isn't what you said. It's my interpretation of what I think you meant.
So why did you actually set up Group Partners? What was your thinking behind,
So
who do you serve? Why? What was the vision behind setting up the organization?
So if I just go back one step, I was working with some friends of mine in a startup in Cambridge, having left art school and become, slightly more serious about life. And I was privileged to be asked to look after the marketing of this new product that they were planning to launch. And I hadn't realized it at the time how significant it was going to be, but it was the first microcomputer in the United Kingdom, and we won the contract with the BBC to develop the BBC microcomputer. And so I suddenly became quite critical to people like advertising agencies and management consultancies and advisors of every possible nature, because we had lots of money, or we were perceived as having big budgets. And so they would come in, and my job was to give them a brief about what it was we were trying to do. Two things happened. One, I noticed that they were incredibly self-serving about the questions that they asked. And the other was that we didn't really know what we were trying to do. So internally, I'd have conversations with my senior people in the organization, and they were just like, well, we're making this and we're doing that. And I'm thinking, yeah, but who cares? What's the value proposition? What's the vision? What's the idea? What's the operational model that we need to build to be able to even deliver that? Because I felt like I just knew enough as a consumer that I needed to understand these things more simply than perhaps the technology team would be able to tell me, or the sales team would make it too salesy, or it was very, very tough. And of course, the advisors that came in, whether it was a marketing consultancy, they would only ask you questions about the marketing side of it. And the management consultants were only interested in putting in systems and processes that we may or may not need. So we didn't get back far enough from the problem, in my opinion. So I would go to meetings and get so frustrated that I'd have to draw on the wall. I'd take the whiteboard or the flip chart and I'd draw a picture and say, is this what you're talking about? And they go, oh my God, yes. The insight was that they didn't really know what they were talking about until someone visualized it for them. Back in those days, I had no idea what that meant. And it was another one of these dots that needed to be connected later in my journey as Group Partners came into view. I realized that actually I was the sum of all of these experiences in my life. And so that was one. It was quite astonishing how I could issue the same brief to an ad agency or a management consultancy or a service provider. And guess what? I'd get the answer back was either a 30-second TV commercial, a transformation program, or a new piece of software from the same brief, because they were so they were self-serving. They put it through their lens and through their filter. And of course, now leaders really need objectivity. They need challenge, not because someone's got something to sell them. So I don't sell anything. I literally have nothing to sell other than thousands of years of experience of having the privilege to work with large organizations who have the same challenge as me, which is that no one will give them the big picture. I heard a lovely quote yesterday, actually, from Marianne Williamson, who said that the devil is not in the detail. The devil is often in the big picture, which hides in plain sight. And I thought that was such an astonishing insight, because it's so true. We need to see the big picture and we need to get into the detail. But if we're not answering the right question, then we'll solve the wrong problem really well. And that's what I've spent my life doing.
So it's actually like looking down at a project and at the same time having the eyes to look down into a project, and then having eyes that are actually internal in the core. So you're actually looking in all different directions.
Absolutely right. Yeah, you need multiple perspectives and you need impartial challenge. And and someone who knows the right questions to ask. And I think it's impossible to be objective to ourselves. I think you may have heard me say that before. It's very difficult for me to be objective about myself. I can only rely on what I hear from other people. So I don't know what questions to ask myself sometimes to make myself better. So the service we provide to others is to simply and respectfully challenge them with sufficient humility that neither side knows the right answer.
Mm.
And so I coined this phrase, let's see, because if a CEO asks me the question, he says to me, you've done this thousands of times, what's the answer to my problem? I go, I don't know, let's see. Let's draw it out on the wall. And because the frameworks and the structure of these visuals is so rich now and full of learning, it reminds us what questions we need to ask, not only for the detail, but for the big picture. Mm-hmm. So it says, what is it you're trying to achieve anyway? Therefore, what matters? And as we say, there's no good trying to create a vision from where you are today. You create a vision. And then you step back far enough and say, right, now if that's my vision, what is it about today that I need to change, shift, blow up, alter, get rid of?
Yes.
But also making sure that your vision is clear in spite of where you are today, so that you do not compromise your vision by your current reality. You create your vision and then deeply understand your current reality to remove any obstacles from achieving your vision. And of course, what happens in many companies is they create a vision and then forever compromise never getting there because they don't do anything about the current reality to get it out of the way. So you go into these large organizations and they have this vision written on the wall that they have no chance of getting to because no one's done anything differently. I mean, you and I have both seen those kinds of organizations. The vision is wonderful and inspiring, but there's no hope of anyone getting there because there's no path to blow up what's in the way.
But it sounds like you're talking about journey. It sounds like you go in and you both the organization that you're helping and you go on a journey together. And that journey is actually created on a wall. Do all your organizations understand where they're going with the visuals? How do you know?
Not really.
How do you educate them to know that they have? It's for me. That's what I learned from you, is to think totally out of the box. How do you educate your clients on thinking in a totally different way? Because it would be very different from what they have learned.
Yeah, that someone taught me something very interesting a long time ago, which is what you have to try and develop is pre-nostalgia. You have to say to people, you're going to love this.
You will.
And you have to say, and perhaps maybe the trick is that this is not going to take you 6 months. This is going to take you a few short weeks and perhaps a couple of days in a room with me, helping your team through some of the really bad treacle to overcome their inertia. So it's a bit like I was saying at the beginning, you trick people into it in the nicest possible way and say, look, this is going to be far less painful than having a few £1 million consultant crawling all over your organization for 6 months and ending up in exactly the same place. I mean, being very unfair to management consultants, but we hear those stories all the time. And that's because, as you rightly say, these processes don't take the organization with them. They tend to outsource the problem. My model is the opposite. My role is to coach, mentor, advise, become their friend, take them on this journey. Trust me, I'm going to spend a couple of days on a wall with you, which is part of the product. And they'll be nodding and they'll be going, yeah, no, that sounds really good because that's not what we've done before, which has never worked. So let's give this a go. And my price point is way infinitesimally small compared to the alternative, which is this porridge for 6 months with a huge price tag on it. Now, that's not any substitute for doing the hard work. So I don't go into a wall unprepared. I probably know more about their organization than some of the people in the room by the time I'm in front of them, because I need to know what the questions are that need to be asked, the ones that they don't ask themselves. And I can only do that by foraging for insight in the clues in what they write about themselves. So I'm sort of part armchair psychologist or psychiatrist at this point. I'm asking them the questions of let me hear you talk about you, you know. And in their answers, they give you many clues, which is they really do not have a clear vision, or they really do not know their role, or they're not collaborative, really. They are divisional or departmentalized. And isn't it interesting how organizations split themselves into departments or divisions?
Yeah.
That's an interesting word. They're divided. And in a world with digitalization, which connects everything, you've immediately got a problem, which is they're not talking the same language. Part of the problem I had in, you know, even in the startup, which grew to 400 people, by the way, very quickly, they did exactly the same. And I railed against it because they formed the marketing department and the sales department. And I was partly responsible, but I could do nothing about it because popular wisdom was that's how you did it. So all of my time was spent breaking down the language barriers between the sales department and the marketing department because they had to work together. The sales department had a completely different language to the marketing department. It was a problem then, and it's still a problem today. So that fascinates me, how people do that.
So that's the word collaboration, which you use a lot in your website. I was reading through it's just collaboration is unity. It's people coming together, people journeying together. I mean, you can have it even on a farm here. You can have one looking after the cattle, one looking after the horses, and if they don't work together, it's chaos because it just doesn't work. And that's on just two people. So with a company, but the question I was going to ask is, what are the unique selling points? You know, about group partners. I know what you do is very different because you actually draw everything. It's very visual. For me, I think humans work better seeing colors. You know, colors and they can relate better, and I think it gives people a better vision on the way forward. So this is two questions in one, but are there any other companies that are doing what you do, or are you unique in what you do?
Well, we were unique. I think there were always people that would what's called graphic facilitation. So people would always sort of turn up and, you know, draw on the walls while meetings are being held. You know, that's been around for quite a long time. It's called graphic recording, and it's probably the furthest away from what I do that you can imagine. I think it's sort of making the problem look pretty. It's kind of people sitting in the room just drawing what they're hearing. I'm not doing that at all. I'm getting people to co-create. I'm asking a question, listening to 10 or 20 people have the discussion. And as I add supplementary questions, I can draw out the inference and the insight and the collusion between their thoughts. So they see their collaboration honored on a wall. And I will never forget the number of times, I always remember the number of times that people say, we've never had that clarity of idea. We've been saying different words, but meaning the same thing for years, but we've never seen it articulated in that act of co-creation, in that act of collaboration, in that cooperation, which is an interpretation of language. And there's a sort of an eloquence, a visual eloquence and clarity that joins those ideas together, which is so powerful, which is why it accelerates value as you go through this, what we call structured visual thinking. It's not just drawing random pictures and cartoons on a wall and then coloring it in. That's not what it is. I mean, people always love the art of it because thanks to my father, I could write on a wall and people would be able to understand the words. I could construct a framework that was an architecture or an engineering diagram, which is a systems diagram of the organization. So by the time they've finished, they can see their current reality, their future vision, their operating model, the metrics, the KPIs, the outcomes, the intention, the purpose, the mission, you know, all these things literally on a 100-foot wall, which they always want to keep. And, you know, we have tears when I tear it off the wall. So literally people go, oh.
Well, they probably have tears because they feel that they've helped you create something and they're part of it.
Well,
so
they've invested,
yeah, they've
exactly.
invested their time. They can see it, something evolving because it's visual. That's
totally, they own it, and they do get to keep it, and we do honor it and respect it. So we don't literally tear it off the wall. We have to tear it off the wall because otherwise they wouldn't be able to use the room again, you know. But besides that, they do get records of this, and you know, it's a whole thing. It's a whole experience, and I think it's very important because they, as you rightly say, have this invested ownership in this mutual exchange of value. That is this kind of epiphany that they've not got any other way by people going away and solving the problem for them. So the other answer to your question is it unique? I've not found anybody quite doing this, if I'm honest, but I'm not arrogant enough to think that no one else has done this. But having analyzed that question a few times from various people, you've got to be able to be curious enough to understand the organization well enough to ask the right questions. You've got to keep 20 or 30 people's attention for 2 days. You're on your feet, or 3 days, or a week. You've got to be able to draw it on the wall in real time. You've got to be able to spot when there's conflict in the room, and conflict for me is a good thing. And you've got to be comfortable with silence, which not very many people are. You know, they ask a question and then try and answer it themselves because they don't like the deafening silence, which is when people are actually thinking. So they kind of miss the point. So it's an interesting field, really.
So what do you, if you were, let's say, 30 years younger, what advice would you give yourself stepping into the world now, as in values of leadership with what you're doing? Would you change anything? Would you change your journey? Would you have?
What a great question. Would I change anything? Probably not, because I quite like the lessons I've learned. I didn't enjoy them at the time, learning them, because they were painful. I'm sure you know Yuval Noah Harari, who's written 3 outstanding books called Sapiens. He was asked a very similar question. What advice would you give to your 15-year-old? He said, don't listen to the older generations. They mean well, but they haven't got a clue what's going on.
I like that.
And I think that kind of sums it up for me. And I don't know whether I invented this phrase or not, but you've heard me say, you know, let's not solve the wrong problems really well. And that's what we try and do to our clients. But the fact is that you kind of have to forget what you know. I say to people, and someone wrote a book on this, which I thought was spectacular. I'd already been harboring this idea, which is that knowledge is dangerous because it's knowledge, it's in the past. And the world we live in, whilst there are things that we know and the things that there may or may not be true, but in a world of misinformation, knowledge can be a hostage to fortune, because the knowledge we had isn't the knowledge we need to help us on the journey going forward. And I have this sort of slogan for myself, which is, you know, may the bridges I burn light my way, which is, you know, drown your former self every day, because you need to be ready and prepared and open for anything to happen, because it will. You know, a decade ago, we didn't have the iPhone or the iPad, video. All of these services that we now take for granted, that we live by, have only really happened in the last 10 years. And unless you think like that, you'll be making you know, you'll be solving problems that will not exist in the future. I was talking last night about this chap called David Rose from the Singularity University, who said that any business designed for success in the 20th century is doomed to fail in the 21st. So it's kind of ideas like that that I think I would say to my younger self, which is almost, you know, trust yourself, really. I would probably tell myself to write a lot more than I did, because writing is probably the most powerful form of learning and education you can possibly have. I think work hard and be nice to people is another sort of byline to there's not enough caring and liking in the world. I think people have been taught to hate and divide and be cynical. And I think, you know, as you write your ideas and explore yourself, your passion can bubble up and you will be surprised where your passion actually is. I think you've got to ask better questions, and that's difficult because, as I said earlier, you don't know how to ask yourself the smarter question. Be curious. Ignore the celebrity and the stereotypes that everyone tells you need to be like this, you need to do that, you need to be like them, and that's just wrong on every level. And don't believe anyone who tells you can't be something.
Totally agree with everything you said. That's so amazing. It's just because we live in a world of comparison. So as a unique human being, we have unique gifts and talents. Your gifts are very different from anyone else. And I mean, that shows in what you do, but it's good that you've picked up on that passion and you've stayed with it and you've create something that is unique, where I think it's so easy today for all of us to want to be like somebody else. That's really not what you're saying is that, which is true, is that we've got to look down on our lives, look in our lives and just see what passion we have and gifts we have. And then that road will open up.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of shame. It's a shame, isn't it, that we get taught not to be curious and creative at school. I always say to people, you know, let me start somewhere else. Actually, I said to myself several times, I feel like I'm an imposter. I have this imposter syndrome because I get up and draw on a wall. How crazy is that? I mean, it's not really what I do, but it's what a lot of people remember me for. So I feel like, well, why can't everybody do this? And then on the other side, it's like, well, they take your crayons away when you're 5 and tell you that drawing is pointless and useless. And it's just so not, you know. So what do you know? Whoever tells you that you can't do this and that's rubbish, and, you know, singing, what sort of career is that? You know, we all got told back in the day, you know, you want to be in a pop group or don't listen to anybody. And it's kind of brings you back to that whole, what we do in life is we're trained to compromise.
Very true.
It's just such a shame. Why are we trained to compromise? It's wrong, right?
Yeah, and I think what we do as we get older is that we actually start living in a box, and we create walls for ourselves, which we've created, and we can't actually see the walls, but because they're there, we don't move into different, we don't take risks, I think we've grown into a generation where we want to be comfortable, and risk and comfort don't go hand in hand. But that was interesting, because I was going to ask you what the last question was about, you know, for advice on somebody, a young person who wanted to create an organization, you know, what advice you would give them. But I think you've actually answered that over the last 5-10 minutes about, you know, not comparing yourself with other people, but just moving forward and taking that journey of passions and stuff that you have.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's a difficult one because I think when you're starting out, you're probably answering the wrong question. So I think you've got to, it's a really tough one. It can take years. And I don't think this is something that you can do other than through experiencing it. You know, test and learn is the common language today, of course, but it's kind of a cliche for most people. They don't really get it.
Yeah.
So you have to get people to pay attention. And that's why I sort of start with writing, because when you write, you realize how bad your thought was or how good it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then you end up polishing it better and better. And if you've ever, as you have, written a book, you start to realize how much you write that isn't necessarily what you meant, but it's in there somewhere. And it's rather like the same thing of a young person who wants to do something and doesn't know where to start. They've got to really drill on their passion. They've really got to learn to stand outside themselves and challenge themselves and, you know, ask themselves what the question is they really want to answer. And it's a journey, and it won't happen overnight. They're never going to go, oh yeah, I need to really make it this. That won't happen. So start with an exam question, as we call it, and just keep challenging that question until, you know, you can't challenge it anymore.
Yeah.
There's a technique in the work that I do, which is when I ask a question about vision or ambition and purpose, I say, what's your purpose? And they say, oh, well, we need to be the #1 business in our category. And of course, to many leaders, you know, that's probably a perfectly valid answer. I think it's rubbish. So I say, so that, and of course, at the beginning of a workshop, this is like, they hate me.
Yes.
What do you mean, so that? This is a perfectly valid purpose. And I said, well, it doesn't, you want to be the best company in your category so that, and they go, oh, well, so that we are in business for a long time. So that, and then eventually the penny will drop, so that we can be of value to our community, or so that we can, you know, sustain the jobs and the livelihoods of people that work for us, or so that we can really achieve the purpose that we didn't even realize we had yet. And I'm talking about seasoned, you know, decade-long famous CEOs in large corporate boardrooms who will trot out the company vision statement and have no bloody idea at all what that really means. And it, you know, I think that the young people have probably got a much better chance of getting to that, so that, or answering that, so that question, so that I can make a difference, so that I can live a life that I feel valued, and so that I can inspire others to come after me. And there's just like, where do you get taught that? You don't get taught that in school. You don't get taught that unless you're very lucky and find people who will give you that kind of advice.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's not the advice you get, because we're conditioned to play the game of a society that's in a capitalist economic system that promotes growth at all cost. And at all cost, sadly, is to the planet and to the people. And that's just got to stop. And, you know, that's what drives me.
And I think what you were saying about writing down it for a young person to actually record everything just really outlines to them. I like what you said about going back and actually reading what you've actually written.
Yeah.
And then you think, nah, and you can cross through or you can add to it. And it allows people to get a better, it's that you were talking about the companies, you know, what, do they ever ask the question, why? Why are we doing what we're doing? And if there's no value, then why are you doing it? So when you were talking then, I just had this why, you know, we don't have that why. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why do I wake up in the morning? Why did I do that?
So that you can do this, so that, exactly, you know, ask why, ask yourself. And I think these days the kids will probably be able to, you know, do a video of themselves or get someone to video what they think their passion is. And then they'll suddenly realize it isn't.
Yeah.
But the writing is interesting because that uses a part of your metaphysical cognition, and your brain is firing in a slightly different way. The act of thinking about the words that you would need to use to describe your passion. And I think there's some interesting new educational opportunities in these kinds of areas where we are going to have to really think a lot harder. And for that, you need people to be engaged and pay
Especially with the
attention to.
digital, with the iPhones and computers. You're actually,
Yeah.
I was reading an article today about how it's really affecting people to actually write, because people are not writing anymore. And that the whole action of mind, it's mental and physical, is no longer there. It's a totally different world. Like you said, you're creative. It's almost like you can reach inside when you write and put it on in black and white on paper, and you realize that you can form something out of that. I think that's so amazing. The question I had, John, for you is, there'll be so many people listening to what you've said, and you know, I've learned an awful lot about you. I never knew you went to art college, but obviously that was probably obvious, and about your dad and just how you think. I mean, it's just so refreshing. It makes me want to go and write tomorrow about my vision and pull myself out and say, no, maybe I should do this. And yeah, so, but if people want to know more about John Caswell and more about Group Partners, how would they get in contact with you?
Yeah, well, let me first of all say it's been a pleasure to speak to you about it today. I love talking about these issues, and very seldom talk about me. So that's caused me to have to think. It's not about me. So grouppartners.online is the website. So grouppartners.online has pretty much everything there. There's a blog, and there's links to my writing, and I'm actually bringing out a book soon, which will be available on Amazon. So you can, I'm writing it in a collaboration, which is, I find, a nice way to write. But yeah, no, I mean, or reach out to me on John Caswell. No, it's not. It's john@grouppartners.net. So john@grouppartners.net. And, or if anybody wants to connect with you, you have all my details.
Yes,
There's that. Probably just Google John Caswell.
Yeah, you're there.
I think I'm sort of there. Or
yeah, you are.
Anything to do with visualization and critical thinking, I probably pop up.
Creativity, a collaboration, it's all there. So anyway, but John, thank you so much. It's just been so refreshing, and just like, wow, it's making me want to go and maybe write book number 2, you know, but be very interested to read your book. So, but thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Lovely to see you, Aina. Take care.